Today, I'll be discussing with you our special topic, which is how to start the low carb and intermittent fasting lifestyle. So we have talked about insulin. We call him boss insulin because in terms of metabolism, insulin is the big boss, right? It's the main determinant of how we utilize glucose. So just in case some of you are very new to this concept, let me just clarify a few things. The body uses a few different fuels for our cells to function. So the most common fuel is glucose that comes from food, and mainly food like carbs. Proteins and fat can also stimulate insulin, but not so much because they're more like alternative fuel type sources. So glucose is the main fuel that's being used by our body. It is usually coming from carbs. So complex carbs, simple carbs. Complex carbs are things like grains, oatmeal, rice, potatoes. And we have the simple carbs, which are the simple sugars, the thing that you find in the supermarket. So things like soft drinks and juices, candies, the things that you find in anything that has an added sweetener usually comes in a few different names. Sometimes they call it high fructose kind of sweetener. There are also what we call like artificial sweeteners. So these things, although the artificial sweeteners will not cause an increase in the glucose as much, but still it will continue to lead to sugar addiction if you already have it. And most people have it without even knowing. So insulin is the big boss here. And insulin tells the cell, okay, you have to let glucose in and you have to use glucose. And as I've mentioned earlier, the three macronutrients, so the three main macronutrients, which are your carbs, your fat, and your protein, all stimulate insulin production, but not equally. So what do I mean by that? Let's have a look at this graph here. So here in this graph, you'll see a comparison between, so this is from Diet Doctor, and this is showing the effect on insulin. So before we get in deeper into this, remember that the reason why we don't want so much insulin in our bodies, like acting up all the time, is because of the simple fact. So the more insulin stimulation you get, the more fat production happens. Okay, so the more you stimulate the insulin, because it's the main regulator of fat deposition in the body. So the way that your body makes fat, then it follows that, so the more active it is, the more fat you make. Look at these spikes here of the carbs. Carbs will usually make insulin go high. So you see the arrow here, it says higher insulin. And so you see it stimulates it more. And obviously what will happen, it makes it more easier for fat deposition to occur. If you compare it to these lower two things here, which are proteins and fat, you see that it stimulates it less, right? And so the things that increase insulin are high carbohydrate diet, a high calorie diet, frequent meals. If you are usually not moving, then your metabolic rate is pretty low, which is what commonly happens in our society. A lot of people are sedentary, right? People don't really move regularly, people don't exercise. So we get into this mode of fat deposition more. Fewer movement, more carbs, then equals more fat deposition. And so it's really important to understand this concept. And doing so will help you understand the science behind why we advocate for low carb and fasting as evidence-based strategies for losing weight. Look at this. If you are like restricting your carbs, for example, which is the green part, carb restriction, then what happens is you don't really stimulate insulin, right? There's no more stimulation of insulin. And so what happens is you start to mobilize your other fat stores. So as you can see here, these are the things that can decrease insulin production. Low carbohydrate diet, a low calorie diet, meals that are consolidated. So meaning you're not snacking so many times a day. Instead of doing your 6 meals, you're eating in a shorter period of time. And this is where the premise of intermittent fasting comes in, because if you're in an intermittent fasting schedule, you usually tend to have a longer fasting time and you consolidate your meals in a shorter period of time. And so looking at this graph again, you continue to, if you're not eating, if you're fasting, you're continuing to burn your excess fuel. So the other things that can, of course, decrease insulin are high intensity exercise, because now you are trying to mobilize your fuel from other sources while you're exercising. Because when you're exercising, what happens is you need those extra fuel, right, to give to your muscles, or which are working hard during the exercise. And so where are they going to take those energy? So it's going to come from the fat. It won't come from the fat if you continue to load up. Like I see this a lot. A lot of people would work in the gym, really like do an intense workout, and then when they go home, what are they gonna eat? Pizza. Gonna eat pizza, burger, French fries. So it defeats the purpose, because then you were trying to lower your insulin, but then after your workout, you're then gonna stimulate insulin. And so I get this question a lot. Like, if I'm fasting, doctor, then is it okay that I'm having my, cheat days, my carbs right after my fast? It shouldn't be that way, right? Because you're defeating the purpose of what you're doing. If you, not to say that you cannot eat carbs, there are a few different carbs, which we'll be talking about later, but really choosing your carbs wisely, carbs that will not stimulate the insulin so much and will not cause these spikes. So like here, you can see those spikes, right? The traditional 3 meals a day in a period of, let's say, 12 hours eating. So you see the red thing here, it's showing you the spikes in insulin. So every time you eat, like your 3 meals a day, you're stimulating insulin, you give very little chance for the body to burn the fat, to burn the excess fuel. The green parts here are your excess fuel. And guess what? In more recent times, how long are people sleeping? People are staying up later and later because of electronic devices, right? The blue light that comes from electronics is very stimulating. And a lot of people will go to bed, looking at their cell phones, scrolling. And so what happens is, instead of falling asleep right away, you get stimulated. So when you're stimulated, you can't sleep. When you cannot sleep, what do? You maybe watch TV. And when you watch TV, what do? You eat, right? Or sometimes some people don't even watch TV anymore. They just go ahead and snack, right? So midnight snack. And it's all coming from the insomnia, right? Like, you're not sleeping well, then you're bored and you feel the hunger all the more. Then you eat again. So this green thing here, so the burning that happens at night, usually doesn't happen as much with late night sleeping, right? Because then here, you're going to get another red spike, which will be from your midnight snack, and then body doesn't get a chance to metabolize. Body does not get the chance to rest and digest and really heal and repair. So this is a very simple thing that I'd like to share with you. When you're not eating and you allow your body to metabolize, you're actually allowing it to repair itself. You're allowing it to rest and repair. So when you're constantly eating, like your 6 meals a day, and very short like intervals, and you're eating all the time, then your body never gets to heal. And so you wonder, oh, not only am I getting fat, I'm actually experiencing so many things. Like, I'm getting joint pains, I'm getting like diabetes, right? High cholesterol, my blood pressure shooting up. So all these like chronic disease things start to happen, and you feel like all the more really like bad physically, right? Not only emotionally, but bad physically. It's this chronic inflammation state that's caused by a body that's not getting a chance to repair itself because you keep feeding it, right? And so every time you feed it, what happens? Insulin gets stimulated and it just has to work, continue to work, and never get to repair itself. All the more fat deposition starts to happen. Why we advocate for things like intermittent fasting, things like time restricted eating. So, meaning TRE is the concept of eating in a restricted amount of time, normally during the circadian rhythm window. So the window of sleep, the daylight cycle. Circadian rhythm is your internal body clock. Time restricted eating, I highly promote it. You have to restrict the time, amount of time that you're eating. And this is where intermittent fasting comes in. Because if you look at this graph, so if you're restricting the time that you're eating, look at this. So earlier, you had this 3 spikes, right? This is your 12-hour eating window, eating 3 times a day. Now you have an 8-hour eating window, which is way less than the first one. And you get just a few spikes here, provided that you're not eating and snacking too much in between. And this is why we like to dispel the myth of having small, frequent meals. Yeah, it may be small, but every time you eat, and usually if it's carby, what's going to happen? Keep stimulating insulin, right? The body never gets a chance to rest. And so if you're eating in a shorter duration of time and also lower carb content, then there's less insulin stimulation and you get more of the green part here, right? You see the green part where the body is in fat burning mode. The body is able to metabolize those excess fat, the excess storage. If you keep bothering your body with dealing with food, it never gets into fat burning. But if you give it some rest, you don't eat so much, you go into intermittent fasting, low carb diet, you're giving the body a chance to rest and to be able to do its fat burning thing. When we promote longer periods of fast, for example, something like OMAD, which I personally do, or things like what we call in this instance the warrior diet, the alternate day fasting. So this is usually more than 20 hours. So the OMAD falls into this category, as well as things like a 36-hour fast, which is alternate day. So 36 hours of fasting, then you eat the next day. So what normally happens is you get the one spike, right? It's the one insulin spike. The green part here will be more fat burning mode. And so especially for people who need to lose weight, this is a very important concept to understand. This is why you need to get into those longer types of fasts. It's because you need to be more of in a state of fat burning rather than fat making, right? You want to get rid of your fat. So does it make sense to continue feeding yourself like small frequent meals and stimulating your insulin? No, it does not make sense. So if now that you understand the science behind it, it's important to note, keep this figure in mind, that if you just stimulate it the one time, eating within the 4 or less hours, so that OMAD window, then you put your body in more of a fat burning mode. And in this way, you're going to lose weight. And so the other important strategy that I normally will promote that goes hand in hand with intermittent fasting is, of course, the keto or low carb diet. So let's go into low carb. So low carb usually should come before the intermittent fasting. It's harder to fast and get into the habit of fasting if you don't adopt the keto or low carb diet first. And the reason for that is you get hunger pangs. You should get your body into a state of fat adaptation. So get your body in a state of fat adaptation first through low carb or keto before you get into the intermittent fasting, especially the longer schedules. And again, the reason for that is because it's easier to sustain a fast. You'll get less side effects, right? Because if you go right into fasting and you have not allowed your body to adapt to fat, so fat adaptation means your body is used to burning fat for fuel. And you only be able to do that if you first transition into a low carb diet. How do you define low carb? So there are three different categories. So we have ketogenic, which is under 20 grams. In this example, you see here a nice steak with broccoli, a little bit, I think these are egg medallions, and then you have some spinach or arugula and tomatoes. And look at the net carbs here, only 6 grams, right? It's only 6 grams. So definitely within our 20 grams per day. So this is ketogenic. Now you get the kind of middle range, which is moderate. So this is 20 to 50 grams per day. And you will see here a bit of, so just a note here. The first one, ketogenic, is mainly showing you above ground vegetables. So when it's above ground, it's less starchy, right? So when it's less starchy, less complex carbs, it's going to be more fiber. And so the net grams of carbs will be much lower. So when you go into moderate, you can see here a combination. They've added some peppers, added some carrots. So carrots, even though carrots are healthy, it's good to note that it's still below ground vegetable. So all the below ground vegetable root crops, right? Even like our sweet potatoes, all these below the ground types of vegetables will be more starchy. So when they're more starchy, they will stimulate insulin more compared to above ground vegetables. So this is your moderate carb diet. Now, if we go to the last bit here, so liberal is 50 to 100. So 50 to 100 grams per day. You can add a few more things here. So here, I think they added some yam. So this is, again, below ground. I mean, compare this liberal, so 37 grams, with the ketogenic, which is just 6 grams. So it's a huge step up, right? Even with just adding a few pieces of below ground vegetables because they're very starchy, right? And same thing for things like grains, right? If you add rice, if you add especially white rice or any grain-based product. So things like, for example, bread, different kinds of baked goods, pastries, usually from, bleached flour, they're really going to pull up that net carb amount. This is why it's important to know the kinds of things that would give you a lower net carb. And so for someone who's wanting to lose weight, it is advisable, with the guide of preferably a physician who's knowledgeable in nutrition, intermittent fasting, low carb nutrition. It's important to guide them to ease into the ketogenic diet first. So if you are needing to lose a lot of weight and you need to reverse your medical conditions right away, like for example, your diabetes is so bad, it's really uncontrolled, then it's going to take you a much longer time to reverse that medical condition and to lose the weight if you stick to liberal carbs. And this is why a lot of people, they would go into, for example, 2 meals a day. So TMAD, 2 meals a day, or OMAD, 1 meal a day. But then in their fueling window, so their feasting window, they eat a lot of carbs. It's going to put them even beyond liberal, right? If you think about it. So do you guys know how much carbs is in a piece of bread? So usually the multigrain variety, it can be anywhere from, I've seen like 15 all the way to 30. Imagine one piece, right? 30 grams of carbs. So immediately that's going to put you right here beyond the liberal. It doesn't make sense that you're doing that fasting and then you're just really like offsetting it by eating the wrong things. And so it's really important for intermittent fasting to go hand in hand with low carb nutrition, especially when you need to lose weight and especially when you need to reverse medical conditions. So we advocate for combination of intermittent fasting and low carb. Usually, if you're just in the maintenance phase, you're okay to stay in moderate or liberal, especially if, like me, you work out a lot. Like I regularly work out, I do moderate to intense workouts, and so it is okay for me. And you can see I don't really have fat stores to lose. I don't have excess fat. So usually someone like me will need to be in moderate or liberal. But for people who are just really like starting out, you can ease into it by going into moderate, later on ketogenic, right? To meet your weight goals and your health goals. So this is from Diet Doctor. This is their general recommendation. So what are the things that you need to eat? So the first thing would be in terms of like proteins, for example. So guys, I always talk to you about the importance of sticking to whole foods, right? The more whole the food is, so the more close it is to its natural form, less processed, less addition of chemicals, the better it will be. Because in that case, you'll know that there was no added sugar or no added chemicals. So in this list, you see that for the meat, for example, so protein, there are a few different sources. So there are meat, fish and seafood, and there's eggs, right? So for meat, you can see here all the meats, right? You can basically have beef, you can have pork, lamb, you can have game and poultry. You can have things like deer if you eat deer, or bison. Like here in our area, people hunt those things. So bison, deer. You can have even like rabbit if you live in Europe, right? So these are all meat. So rabbit is a game meat. Sometimes people eat like the wild boar. So those are like meats, right? So any meat that's unprocessed is pretty good. So you're okay to have liberal quantities. If you've seen my post about exercise and fasting, if you are strength training, you're allowed to have a little bit more protein. Usually it's in the range of between, I'd say 1 to 1.5 gram per kilogram body weight of protein. And the next source for protein will be fish and seafood. So all kinds of fish and seafood are okay. So there's preference for fish like salmon, mackerel, or herring. And why is that? Because they are sources of fat. They're fatty fish. Sardines can also be a source of fatty fish. So fish and seafood are okay as well for people who love seafood, right? You can have things here like lobster, right? Shellfish, all those other things from the sea. And eggs, this is kind of a staple in keto diets, low carb diet. Eggs, great source of protein and also fat. So for the natural fat, there are a few varieties here. So natural fat can be things like butter, olive oil, salmon is a natural fat source. Again, other things like sardines, mackerel, these are natural fat. Avocado is natural fat. The oil of avocado, coconut oil, MCT oil, these are all naturally occurring fat that you can use safely. And also some synthetic ones like creams, cheese, right? Some cheeses are fatty. Chia seeds, if I haven't mentioned before. So these are natural fat. Again, we want to, it's okay occasionally to have things like lard, which comes from animal source, but if you can get it from plants, then that's also good. What about the vegetables? So all kinds of above ground. So things like cabbages, asparagus, zucchini, eggplant, olives, spinach, mushrooms, cucumbers, lettuces, peppers, and tomatoes. And these are all great things to have in your pantry. How do you make it easier for yourself to get into the low carb lifestyle? Your shopping list, your pantry should actually be stocked and equipped with these things, right? And so this is the reason why I'm sharing with you this food list. So you get into the habit of restocking these things on a weekly basis. Because if you don't, then what ends up happening? You tend to turn to fast food, right? Especially when you're busy and you don't have the supplies. And usually, what are the things that are being sold as fast food, they're very carby things, sugary things. So it's important for you to have these things stocked in your pantry, in your refrigerator, put them on your grocery list so that it's easier to mix and match meals made from these whole foods. Whole foods, great protein sources, and great fat sources. So you see here for dairy products, you can have anything that, is full fat. So things like yogurt, cream, cheeses again, cheese is also here. And they're just saying to be careful about any milk that says like reduced fat. You want it to become as fatty as possible. So remember this graph here. Don't be afraid of fat. Do not be afraid of fat because fat will not stimulate insulin as much as carbohydrates. For the longest time, a lot of people were afraid of fat because they're saying, oh, I have high cholesterol. So if I have high cholesterol, then I'm not going to eat fat because that will make my cholesterol even go higher. But the thing is, you have to understand that it doesn't work that way. In metabolism, the thing that will push your cholesterol metabolism to create more fat is actually the things that will drive insulin, right? And so the things that will drive insulin are carbs, right? So do not be afraid of fat. And I've given you a list here of good fat so that you realize that they're not actually scary, right? They're not scary. So nuts and berries, again, nuts, great source of fat. So all the nuts, they're okay to have. Just a little bit of caution with the peanuts. They're more calorie laden. So for people who are trying to really lose the weight, although we say do not count calories, but if you're really trying to lose so much weight, then best to stick to low-calorie types of nuts. So macadamias, walnuts, almonds, those types of things. Okay, and berries. So raspberries, strawberries, blueberries. I know it's a bit hard if you're living in the Philippines to find these things, but alternatives would be something like apple, for example. A lot of fruits can be sources of really high sugar. So you have to be careful. If you're only eating OMAD, that's okay. It's okay for you to have those fruits. But just a caution, if you eat too much fruits, they're going to stimulate insulin as well. Okay. And finally, so the drinks, right? So the drinks, what can you drink when you are in keto or intermittent fasting? So anything without added sugar is okay. Water, sparkling water, black coffee, green tea, water with a bit of mint, water with a bit of lemon, water with a bit of ginger. All these things are okay. You really just have to like quit cold turkey, right? Because they're just going to be pure insulin stimulants. They're usually made up of simple sugar, so the spike in insulin will be just instant. And empty calories, right? They're empty calories. And so the things to avoid, again, sugar. So soft drinks, candy, juice, sport drinks, chocolate, cakes, just a note, chocolate, if you are eating like a limited amount of dark chocolate, it is a good source of fat. So that's okay, but you have to really like eat it in moderation. And here are all your baked goods. So buns and pastries and cakes. And here's a big thing here, breakfast cereal. A lot of people think that when they eat, oh, I eat like shreddies for breakfast. I eat multigrain. But then they fail to read the label. And what most food manufacturers do is they put a lot of sugar to make it palatable, right? Because if you compare it to the other sweet cereals, it's not going to be as tasty. So they will put some like hidden sugar there and you still think that you're eating healthy. You're thinking, oh, I'm eating healthy because I'm eating multigrain. But in reality, the grain itself is an insulin stimulant and the added sugar is an insulin stimulant, right? So be careful of these breakfast cereals. And again, guys, just remember, you may not even need to eat breakfast, right? In our language, in low carb and intermittent fasting, breaking the fast means it doesn't have to be the morning. You can be breaking your fast. For example, you're going OMAD, so 1 meal a day. You're breaking the fast can happen at like say 5 p.m. Like me, most of the time I'm in OMAD, so my breakfast is actually around 5 p.m. So that's the time I'm eating. Usually my 23rd hour of fast, I'm going to eat. So that's my breakfast. It doesn't have to be morning time. Okay, so in reality, you're not needing these cereals. You won't need the cereals. And in that way, you'll save money. And here again, the artificial sweeteners, why don't we like you to still use artificial sweeteners? It's because it's going to keep you in the loop of sugar addiction. Although it's 0 calories, what happens there is you continue to have that craving for sweetness. And so you never really get out of the addiction cycle for sugar. And we're trying to break that cycle by going low carb, right? And intermittent fasting. So if you're kind of cheating and using artificial sweeteners, again, it defeats the purpose. And here, again, the starches are here. I've mentioned all of those: bread, pasta, rice, potatoes, French fries, potato chips, porridge, and moderate amounts of root vegetables, as we've talked about, because they're very starchy. And then margarine. So margarine, why are we not advocating for it? Because these are very highly processed. And then, of course, you have beer, which is a source of carbs and calories. And here, the fruit, we talked about, the more natural it is, the better. Dried fruit can have more carbs, right? Because it's more concentrated sugar. What they're saying here is coconut, citrus, and melon contain fewer carbs than, for example, bananas and grapes. So not all fruit are created equal. A lot of people are scared of doing low carb because they think that they won't be able to sustain it because the food will be very bland and boring. Because in their minds, they think that low carb nutrition is similar to caloric restriction, which is limiting the amount of calories, which can be really very bland and really boring. Some people eat like one piece of lettuce leaf or apple, but low carb is completely not like that. It's the opposite. It can be really fun because it is usually high in fat and high protein. So your favorite things, right? So bacon and sausages, keep them in moderation if they're processed. If they're homemade, that's okay. And, things like ham, pork, right? Like chicken, beef, you can eat all of those. You can have your seafood, right? And then you can have your fats, you can have creams, you can have your butter, things that are very satisfying, taste really great. And you'll see that in the food postings in the group, how satisfying the meals look like, not only look like, but actually taste, right? Very satisfying. It will help you not feel hungry so much. And it's very sustainable that way. So join our group. So just look for Level Up Wellness Community and we'll warmly welcome you. Maybe if you're completely brand new, start with low carb for a week. Okay, low carb for a week. Try to start maybe moderate low carb. So go start with moderate low carb first. So that's your 20 to 50 grams, like this plate here, for example, right? Does that look boring to you? It doesn't look boring to me. I have a steak here, and you can eat that with a little bit of cheese and butter, and the net carbs will still be low, right? Because it's just fat. So start with moderate, and then work your way to keto. And then once your body gets used to keto, then you can start your fasting. So you can start with something like this, an 8-hour eating window, 16-8. This is more of the time-restricted eating. So after the 1 week of your low carb, go to your 8-hour eating window, 16-8, and eventually you can transition to OMAD, right? OMAD, more than 20 hours of fasting. And later on, if you need further guidance with this, then you can do longer extended fasts, but you will need guidance from someone who has proper education in longer fasts. So if you think that you may need more help with creating a plan, or if you want to follow a program, stay tuned. We're also releasing our wellness program. It'll have the diet there, the fasting regimens, and also some exercises, and something to help you with stress reduction and also a more like holistic way of living. So stay tuned for that.